What are the majority religions in Europe? Which country is home to the most Christians, Jews, or Muslims in Europe? That's what we're going to see in this video. Well, first of all, two important points. We're going to talk about the three monotheistic religions, because they're the only ones that are really present in large numbers in Europe. Furthermore, I'll talk about these religions in general, without distinguishing any group. For example, for people who aren't religious, I'll talk about deists, agnostics, atheists, or even theists. Why is that? Because it's very difficult to obtain precise statistics for each country regarding the groups they adhere to in their religion. For Christianity, I can give you a rough map that represents the major religious groups: Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox. But you see, countries like Switzerland and Germany are split in two, and where a survey of Protestants will be conducted in 2014, one of Catholics will be conducted in 2022, with a gap of almost 10 years. So I prefer a more general survey of Christians in these countries. Okay, first of all, concerning Europe's major religion, Christianity. The Christian religion arrived in Europe as early as the 2nd century AD. From the first Christian communities settled in the Roman Empire in what is now Greece, Italy, Spain, France, and even Germany, Christianity flourished there and remained the majority religion until the 19th century, when it truly began to collapse in Europe. Well, here's the map. As you can see, the religion is still the majority religion in many countries. Only about 10 countries don't have half of their population declaring themselves Christian. For Albania, Kosovo, Bosnia, and Turkey, this is logical since it's not the majority religion. For the United Kingdom, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Estonia, and the Czech Republic, it's more surprising, because it remains the majority religion in these countries. But in reality, here again, there's an explanation: belief in nothing, or at least non-belief in a religion. We'll come back to this later. Otherwise, Moldova, Poland, and Serbia are the most Christian countries in Europe. Which isn't surprising. These countries are very attached to their traditions and had to affirm their faith under anti-religious regimes: the USSR, communism, and Yugoslavia. We also note that countries like Italy, Spain, Greece, and Portugal also remain attached to their traditions. And it's the same in the East. In reality, only countries like Germany, France, Switzerland, and Austria seem to be losing their Christian faith. I haven't mentioned Luxembourg, which has a very high percentage, 92%, as does San Marino. And the Vatican, which is at 100%. Okay, now let's move on to belief in no religion. The irreligious, in short. Yes, it's not a religion, but it is a belief, and an important one in Europe, which has developed since probably the 16th century but only gained momentum from the 19th and 20th centuries. Here we see that in less Christian countries like the Czech Republic, the majority religion is actually irreligion. The countries I mentioned earlier are indeed well represented. Conversely, countries strongly influenced by Christianity or other religions, which we will see later, are very poorly represented. Poland, Serbia, and Kosovo have very low percentages. But inevitably, the winner is the Vatican, with almost 0% of non-believers. By the way, to make the map intelligible, micronations like Andorra, Monaco, San Marino, Vatican, Malta or Liechtenstein are not listed, but I take them into account and mention them when they show interesting scores. Furthermore, I specify that the sources vary and that the polls also vary, which explains why a country can have a score of 110%. This is because a poll will say, for example, that 45% of Germans do not believe in anything, 55% believe in Christianity, and 8% in another religion, which does not make 100% but 108%. Let's move on to a second religion, monotheistic this time, Judaism. It is a religion that has always been present in Europe but has never found its place. Under the Roman Empire, Jews were persecuted. During the Middle Ages and until the Second World War, Jews were allowed to occupy financial positions forbidden to Christians, but they suffered repression. In Spain and France they were expelled before the end of the Middle Ages. Then during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, they were persecuted in Eastern European countries, with pogroms. In any case, as you can see on the map, Judaism has almost disappeared from Europe. In Germany, the Jewish community was rebuilt after the Second World War. France and the United Kingdom welcomed many Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, but also Sephardic Jews from the Maghreb. Russia also welcomed Jews, but it already had a large population that persisted over time despite pogroms and World War II. Otherwise, Jews are a very small minority in Europe. Finally, let's move on to the last monotheistic religion, Islam. This religion first arrived in Europe via the Iberian Peninsula. The Arabs conquered Spain, Portugal, and even part of southern France. They also conquered Sicily around the 9th century. However, they have not yet established themselves in these regions. It was the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans that permanently established Islam in Europe. Let's look at the map. As you can see, Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Turkey are predominantly Muslim countries, a remnant of the Ottoman Empire's conquest of the region around the 15th century. Many of its people converted following the Turkish presence and colonization. Serbia, Romania, and Greece, however, remained faithful to Christianity. For the rest of the map, Belgium, France, the United Kingdom, and Sweden have seen Islam arrive in their countries through immigration. Moroccans mainly in Belgium, Algerians, Malians, and Senegalese in France, Pakistanis, Afghans, Syrians, and Egyptians in the United Kingdom, and mainly Afghans and Syrians in Sweden. There are also converts in these countries, especially in the United Kingdom. Islam developed in these countries around the 1980s and then the 2000s, with increasing emphasis since 2010. The countries of the former Eastern Bloc have not experienced a strong wave of migration since the 1980s, which explains the low percentage. I would like to point out that for Islam in particular, it is difficult to know exactly the percentage of people who adhere to it. For example, in the United Kingdom, the statistics are clearer than in France or Germany, which makes it difficult to assess the real percentage. Keep in mind that there is always a margin of error between those who did not understand the question, those who did not necessarily answer clearly, the place where the questions were asked, the question itself, etc. That's it. This is the end of the video. Please leave a like, share the video, and comment on it, telling me what you think of it, and sharing your opinions on religions and statistics in your own country. Thank you. See you soon.